More now on the news, Justin, that the US Senate Foreign Relations Committee has approved a resolution authorizing the use of military force in Syria by a vote of 10-7. So certainly significant, but just the start of a process. Let's talk now to our correspondent in Washington, Rajini Vaidyanathan, who's been keeping across all of those developments there on Capitol Hill. So a vote of 10-7. What does that tell us about the rather intense discussions that were going on?
Well, I was watching some of the discussions in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee earlier today, and what they were discussing was this piece of paper here. It's a draft resolution that they drew up yesterday, which would authorise the use of military force in Syria. Now, it's this resolution that they needed to agree on before they can then put it to a vote of all senators next week when they're back from their summer break. And what was happening this afternoon, though, was intense discussion and debate about the fine detail of what exactly this resolution should contain. Now, let me just go through the broadest points of it. In short, it approves this would approve limited military mission against Syria for 60 days, but an additional 30 days could be added on. So a total of 90 days, but the additional 30 days, it says, for a single period of 30 days if the President determines and certifies to Congress not later than 5 days before the date of termination of the initial authorization. So a lot of legal speak there, but effectively they could extend it by another 30 days. Also, very crucially, and this was something that came up in a lot of the discussions over the past 24 hours as well, it would have no ground troops, so no boots on the ground, and that's something a lot of the senators here were very, very concerned about. What it doesn't have is something that Senator John McCain, the Republican senator, was pushing for, and he was pushing for much more extended presence. He was saying that he wanted something that gained a reversal of momentum on the ground, and again, in plain speak, he was basically saying he wanted the US to beef up military capability of the Syrian opposition. But from what we can see now, we're just kind of getting news now of this vote. It looks like the resolution that was drawn up yesterday is the one that has been passed. So it's this that will then go to the Senate floor next week and be voted on by all senators.
And I suppose the question is, how much of an indication is this of how the full vote might go next week?
Well, I mean, if you look at the numbers here, 10-7 and one senator just saying present, so effectively an abstention, it's close. And that's a sign of what we're getting across the board. There is a poll that came out earlier today looking at what the potential voting could be of the Senate. And the large majority of people on that poll say they're still undecided. And that's the thing that we're getting when we talk to senators and congressmen here in the halls of Congress. They're saying they still haven't made up their mind. And that's why all these briefings and hearings, there's a hearing going on right now here in the House of Representatives where Secretary of State John Kerry, Secretary of Defense Chuck Hagel and the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff General Dempsey are speaking before a committee in the House of Representatives. They're all making the case, and that's what it's all about. How can you turn those undecideds into a yes vote? And that's definitely what the administration is pulling out all the stops on.
Rajini, thank you very much for that update. Rajini Vaidyanathan there. Well, it's been a day of intensifying diplomatic manoeuvring among the world's key political leaders on how best to respond to the crisis. Speaking in Sweden, President Obama said the international community's credibility is on the line. And as we just heard there in the last few minutes, that US Senate panel has approved a resolution giving Mr. Obama authority to use military force. However, the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, warned that if the US Senate votes with the president, then they would be following and allowing, an aggression, since everything that's outside the framework of the UN Security Council is an aggression unless it is self-defense. In Paris, where politicians have now finished their parliamentary debate on Syria, President François Hollande said he will support the use of force. Well, Philippe Bolopian is the United Nations Director of Human Rights Watch, which has been monitoring the humanitarian situation. Philippe, thank you very much for joining us on BBC News. So with much attention on political and diplomatic debates outside Syria, tell us what your people inside Syria and in the region are saying about the humanitarian situation there.
Well, look, sadly, while the world is rightly discussing the chemical issue, it's really business as usual in Syria. meaning that the killing goes on. The Syrian government keeps on doing what it has been doing for the last 2.5 years, meaning systematically attacking its own civilian population. Only a few days ago, for example, the BBC documented an attack on a school with incendiary weapon, napalm type of weapons, which also produce absolutely horrendous injuries, burning kids to the bones. The jails, secret jails in Syria are still full of hundreds, even thousands of prisoners. Many of them being tortured daily. You now have 2 million refugees outside of Syria in the neighboring country. 4 million people who have been displaced inside, and the UN agency dealing with these refugees, UNHCR, is getting only half of the money it needs, despite all the attention that it's going to Syria. So we hope that the plight of the Syrian civilians can come back into the debate. This should not be only about restoring US credibility or enforcing a red line on chemical weapons, however valuable that might be. The issue should be also how to end the killing that has caused over 100,000 civilian lives so far.
And it is a pretty shocking statistic. You were talking there about refugees, that Syria is now the world's second largest producer, if I can put it that way, of refugees after Afghanistan. Do you believe that action, some military action in Syria is needed, although in itself that might lead to further loss of life?
Look, this is a really hard and difficult debate, and as a human rights organization, we do not take a position either for or against military intervention in Syria. What we are trying to ensure is that people ask the right questions. What would be the effect of a military attack? What will be the effect of enforcing a red line on chemical weapons if in the meantime the Syrian government is still allowed to kill hundreds or thousands of people with conventional weapons? Let's not forget, out of the 100,000 of Syrian civilians that have been killed since the beginning of the war, a tiny portion have been killed with chemical weapons. What do we do for these people? Are we continuing to allow Russia and China to get away with protecting at any cost the Syrian government in the UN Security Council, paralyzing any action from the UN side? Do we allow this to go on? Do we allow Russia to continue arming a government that has been shown time and again to deliberately attack its own population? To us, these are the most important questions.
And do your people say that the fighting has continued in the same areas as before? Have they any evidence of either the opposition, the rebels, or President Assad's forces making any gains?
Look, it's very difficult for us to get very timely and accurate information in Syria these days because of the fighting, because of how dangerous it is to be on the ground, because of the simple fact that the Syrian government for over 2 years has done everything it could to deny us and other human rights organizations access to the ground. So we cannot really speak to the current dynamics, but what's beyond any doubt is that for 2.5 years the Syrian government has gotten away with murder in Syria.
So you're essentially just taking what evidence and testimony you can from the refugees moving into other countries in the region?
That's an important source of information. In other cases, we are able to be on the ground at certain times in certain areas. We also have networks of people we are talking to. Right after the chemical attack on Eastern Ghouta, we were able to take testimony from doctors, from victims, showing that many people were exhibiting symptoms consistent with a chemical attack, showing that the shells that were coming from government-held areas. So there is a lot we are able to do despite the government's best attempts to prevent us from working in Syria.
Okay, Philippe Bolopion, United Nations Director of Human Rights Watch, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
The headlines now on BBC News, and that, of course, is our top story tonight as the US Senate panel passes authorization for the use of military force. President Obama says it's not his credibility on the line over the use of chemical weapons in Syria, but the international community's.